This Christmas, Jill Biden went to Matamoros, Mexico, where over 1,500 asylum seekers await their entry into the United States. And while many saw this as a publicity stunt and a photo op, and it might have been, there was something about her visit that gave me hope. It might have been the fact that she and the people she was with offered them a meal of tamales and rice and beans, which is what they had requested for their Christmas meal. But I think more than anything, it was because 1 month prior to Christmas, I was standing in that exact same place, where the border road leads to the sidewalk that opens up to a courtyard. And in that courtyard is a row of camping tents that are used for permanent shelter for the asylum seekers living on the border. And it is a place that once you reach it, you cannot unsee it. Because every individual is a mark on your conscience that cries out, why are we letting anyone live like this? Because that courtyard where the tents were, that was for the lucky ones. The other 1,000 lived in a field beyond the courtyard, where they were susceptible to the mud and the rains and the wind. And beyond the tents, in that area, there were people from all over the world, people fleeing violence, people who now had to encounter violence in Matamoros, which was one of the most dangerous places in the world due to gangs and robbery and kidnapping. And there were also people who had diabetes with no access to insulin. There were people who had cancer with no access to treatment. And there were also kids, laughing, squealing, running children. Some of whom would forget this moment because their brains were protecting them from the trauma that it caused. Some of whom would remember this moment for the rest of their lives, something that changed the trajectory of where their lives would go. But all of whom wanted one thing, and that thing was toys. I have been crossing from Brownsville, Texas to Matamoros, Mexico 2 or 3 times a day, bringing supplies over to the asylum seekers with the organization Team Brownsville. And this organization would serve dinner in the evenings, every evening, would provide services for lunch and sometimes breakfast. They also would bring supplies over multiple times a day to what was called the free stores. And the free stores were different tents in different parts of the 10 cities that offered free supplies to those who would need them. They would get on a list and then they would make sure that they were distributed fairly. And Team Brownsville also provided schooling on Sunday mornings in what was called La Escuelita, or the sidewalk school. And I was with Team Brownsville doing the sidewalk school one morning. And there were 6 tarps that we lined up on the sidewalk. And each one of us teachers would sit on the tarps, and then we'd have a group of about 10 to 15 kids who would learn from us, and then they'd switch to the next tarp. And I was teaching the lesson of head and shoulders, knees and toes. So I taught it in Spanish and then in English, and they like really emphatically stood up and did it. But even more emphatically did they write down the words of each body part: shoulders, stomach, knees. And it was almost like they surrounded me when I started speaking English because they wanted so badly to know what I was saying. And it just showed how much they wanted to learn and how they weren't getting an education, that this was the only education they were getting each week, and this was just like an hour each week. And after I taught my lesson, I played with some of the girls who were in my class. And at the end of playing with them, it was time for us to go. My group was heading back to Brownsville. And I didn't want to stay in Matamoros by myself, so I said I need to go. And this little girl who was about 6 came up to me, held my hands, and said, "No te vayas," which means don't leave. and my heart sank. Just thought about the day spent idle, that she has to sit there not knowing what to do or what games to play. But I knew I had to go. And so after she said "No te vayas" a couple more times, I pried my hands away from hers and walked away. And as I was walking away, the other girls that were with us said, "Do you think you could bring toys?" And I said, "What toys?" And they said, "Dolls. We want some dolls." And so as I was walking down back to Bronzeville, Texas, I'm thinking about the fact that I don't have money to buy all the girls in the camp dolls. But I know I have enough money to buy 6 girls' dolls. And I go to the store later because I'm getting some socks and some underwear for the free stores. And while I'm there, I'm thinking about the ethical quandaries and how fair it would be to give just 6 girls dolls when everybody probably wanted it. And, would they fight over these dolls? Would it be more of a problem than a solution? But I decided I'm just going to walk over to the toys and just check it out, see what I think. Then I get over there, and there's a sale on the Frozen collectibles. And I can't resist. I have to buy the dolls. So I buy 6 dolls, and as I go home to the apartment of my friend, I ask her, about whether she thought it was a good idea to give these dolls, and she said that maybe we could use them as a prize for La Escuelita, that if they read enough books, maybe they could get a doll, and so everybody could work towards it. And I thought that was a good idea. Well, the next day, my bank account is 0. A bill that I thought wasn't going to go through till a while later went through. And I was driving a rental car, and I needed to put gas in the car before I returned it. And so with a heavy heart, I went back to the store and returned the dolls so I could get money for my rental car. And I still went across the border. I still gave the underwear and socks to the free stores. And I still played with the children. They didn't mention the dolls, and I didn't mention them either, out of guilt. And it seemed like they were used to disappointment. And so that day I went to the airport, and actually when I returned the car, I didn't have to pay for gas. And so as I flew back, I wondered if I had made the right decision by not giving those dolls to those girls. And then a month later, I read this article in the newspaper that Jill Biden was in Matamoros, Mexico, and that she gave toys to these kids. And that guilt was relieved a little bit, that somebody gave them some toys. And then a week ago, I was having a drink with a friend. And he was actually in Matamoros, Mexico, the same time that Jill Biden was. And he was actually about 50 feet away from her as she was visiting the asylum seekers. And there was a group about the same size that was around Jill Biden, around him, asking for him to advocate on their behalf to Jill Biden. And though it was sad to hear that they needed help so bad, there was also some hope that I felt that they believed that this stranger could help them. Some hope that really affected the cynicism that I felt, that really affected the fact that I felt like change couldn't happen in this situation, but realizing that they still believe it, even though they've been living there all these months, that maybe change could happen. And then my friend told me that also Team Bronzeville made sure that every child in the camp got toys. And he also told me that there were 2 children who didn't get toys, and those 2 children were the son and daughter of one of the men who ran the free store. And that my friend actually went and got 2 toys for them, and so now all the kids had toys in Matamoros. And I just felt this joy that even though I was not able to do this, that somebody on a larger scale gave these kids what they needed. But then my joy kind of dissipated as I thought that toys are just toys and they can break. and these kids still didn't have shelter and still were waiting to get into the United States. But then I thought about toys and how they live in the imagination of kids. An imagination that could imagine a better world. A world where families don't have to live in tent cities where gangs and kidnappers roam. Where children don't have to be so starving for an education that they swarm their educators asking for answers. A world where illness has its proper treatment and where there's shelter for inclement weather. And I don't always know if that's possible, but I remember from the grip of the girl who said, "No te vayas," that she could imagine a better world. And so maybe this time, so could we.